Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched in the comments. Elias Ward rode slowly along the dry creek bed as the sun dipped behind the distant mesas. The air carried a cold weight that came after long desert days, and the quiet pressed around him in a way he was used to. He had been riding since morning, returning from a supply trip to his settlement nearly 30 miles away. The journey wasn't unusual for him. He preferred long stretches of land with no company. After years drifting from ranch to ranch, losing friends in fights and accidents he still didn't talk about, he had settled into a small cabin hidden among cottonwoods. He worked odd jobs, tended a few animals, and kept to himself. His mission was simple: live quietly, avoid trouble, and stay away from anything that stirred old memories. Ayoka, on the other hand, was nowhere near where she belonged. She had left her people 2 weeks earlier after their small camp was raided by riders who moved from territory to territory, preying on whoever they found. She had lost her older brother during their escape and had been searching for any surviving family since. Her mission was survival: find a safe place, avoid the gang, and look for any sign of her scattered relatives. She had been traveling alone for days, tired, hungry, and constantly alert. As Elias guided his horse down a narrow bend in the creek bed, his eyes caught something unusual: boot prints, uneven and scattered, pressed deep into the dirt. Some were fresh. He pulled on the reins, letting his horse stop. He listened. The wind moved the low branches above him, but there was nothing else. No talking, no horses, no footsteps. Still, something felt wrong. He noticed a torn piece of cloth snagged on a mesquite branch and a dark stain on the sand a few steps ahead. His stomach tightened. Trouble had passed through here recently. He dismounted slowly, one hand resting near his holster. He wasn't the type to go looking for danger, but walking away from a bad situation without checking wasn't something he could do, either. He stepped carefully along the creek, scanning the ground. More signs appeared: dragged footprints, broken brush, dropped gear. Someone had run. Someone had fought. Then he heard it. A faint breath, shaky and uneven. Elias spun toward the sound, raising his gun, but what he found wasn't a threat. A young Apache woman lay half-hidden beside a boulder, her body curled in on itself. Bruises darkened her arms and face. One side of her dress was torn where someone had grabbed her. Her hair stuck to her skin with dust and sweat. She was awake, but barely, blinking slowly as if trying to understand whether he was real. Elias lowered his gun immediately. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." Ayoka stared at him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She tried to rise, but her arms shook and she collapsed again. Elias crouched beside her, moving slowly so she could follow every motion. Up close, he saw the stress in her eyes, the kind that came after running for too long. He scanned the area quickly. 3 bodies lay farther up the creek bed, half covered in dust. The fight had ended only minutes before he arrived. One man was still alive, struggling to push himself upward. Without hesitation, Elias stepped forward, and ended it with a single precise shot. He didn't feel anger, only the cold certainty that leaving the man alive would bring more harm later. When he returned to her, Ayoka's breathing had become rapid. She wasn't terrified of him. She was terrified he might leave. Elias took a moment to think. He had never been responsible for anyone like this. He lived alone for a reason. He didn't want to lose anything else. But he couldn't ride away and pretend he hadn't seen her. Not when she was barely holding on. "I'm going to get you out of here," he said, more to confirm the decision to himself than anything else. "My cabin is close. It's quiet. You'll be safe there." Her eyes shifted toward the bodies in the sand, then to him. She wasn't sure if trusting him was wise, but she had no strength left. She nodded once. Elias lifted her carefully. She winced but made no sound. She weighed almost nothing, which worried him more than the bruises. He carried her to his horse, setting her sideways in the saddle so her injuries weren't pressed. She leaned against him instinctively, too tired to stay upright on her own. As they rode toward his cabin, Elias kept glancing at the horizon, fearing the gang might return with more men. He felt a pressure in his chest, part alertness, part responsibility. Bringing her home would change the quiet life he kept, but abandoning her wasn't an option he could live with. Ayoka rested her head lightly against his shoulder, not fully conscious. Her last clear thought before drifting was that the man guiding the horse spoke softly and moved with care, something she hadn't seen in a long time. By the time the cabin appeared between the cottonwoods, Elias had made up his mind. Whatever trouble followed, he would deal with it. He couldn't turn away from someone who had already lost too much. He helped her inside, placed her on his bed, and stoked the stove. For now, he didn't ask her story. He didn't need details to understand the fear in her eyes. All he needed to know was that she was alive and she was safe, and that he had chosen to keep her that way. Elias closed the cabin door behind him and listened to the quiet settle into the room. The only sound was the low crackle of the stove and Ayoka's unsteady breathing. She lay on his bed, eyes half open, trying to make sense of where she was. The fear in her gaze wasn't wild anymore, but it hadn't faded either. She looked around slowly, checking the walls, the small table, the single window, and then him. It was the look of someone trying to judge whether this place was safety or another threat. He kept his distance, pulling a blanket from the shelf and placing it across her legs without touching her skin. "You're safe here," he said quietly, unsure if she understood every word. He pointed toward his chest and then the room. "Safe." Her breathing steadied. She understood enough. The stove warmed the room quickly, and Elias moved around with deliberate calm, lighting the lantern, setting water to boil, pulling down a tin of dried meat. He didn't rush. Fast movements could frighten someone still running on fear. He had seen men come out of fights with the same hollow stare she had now, and he remembered how long it took for their hands to stop shaking. When she tried to sit up, her arm buckled. Elias stepped forward but stopped himself before reaching out. He didn't want to grab her without warning. Instead, he crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes. "Let me help," he said, slowly lifting a hand and waiting for her to nod before touching her shoulder. She allowed it. He eased her upright and propped a pillow behind her back. Her clothes were torn, and there was dried blood on her elbow. He noticed she kept glancing at the door, checking if anyone else might enter. She didn't know this land, or him, or whether the gang might follow. The uncertainty sat heavy in her face. He poured water into a tin cup and placed it in her hands. She drank it too quickly, choking once before forcing herself to slow down. He placed a small bowl of food beside her, but she didn't touch it yet. She was waiting, watching him, making sure this kindness wasn't a trick. Elias respected that. Trust didn't come easy to him, either. As she ate a few bites, he used the quiet to address the gaps left from the night before. Things any listener would wonder. "No one else is coming," he said. She looked up sharply, so he explained, "I checked the tracks. They left in a hurry. The ones I found were all there. No more." That answer eased the tension in her shoulders. She wasn't safe from the world, but she was safe for tonight. He also knew she might be wondering who he was and why he helped her at all. He didn't want misunderstandings. "My name's Elias Ward," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I live out here alone. I don't bring people here often, but I wasn't going to leave you there." Ayoka studied him with a steady, cautious gaze. She didn't speak yet, but something in her expression shifted. Less fear, more awareness. He wasn't demanding anything from her. He wasn't asking where she came from or what happened. He let her rest, and that meant more to her than he realized. A few minutes later, she spoke her name quietly, almost as if testing him. "Ayoka." He nodded once. "Ayoka. That's a strong name." She didn't respond, but her eyes softened with a tired acceptance. She had offered him the smallest piece of her identity. For her, that was an act of trust. When a gust of wind rattled the window frame, she flinched. Elias walked to the window and reinforced the wooden shutter with a thick beam. "This place holds in storms," he said. "Holds against worse, too." He didn't say it to impress her. He said it because she clearly needed the reassurance, and he wanted her to understand she wasn't unprotected anymore. As the night deepened, Ayoka tried to stay awake, watching him move around the cabin, but her eyelids grew heavy. Elias noticed and spoke gently. "You can sleep." I'll keep the fire up. Before resting, she looked around again, searching the room for any hidden danger. She checked the corners, the floor, his hands, his posture. Everything looked calm. Nothing pressed toward her or demanded anything. When her eyes met his one last time, she saw no tension, only quiet concern. She let herself lie back. Elias placed another log in the stove and rolled out his bedroll on the floor near the door. He knew she might question why he didn't sleep beside her or outside. So he explained before she asked. I'll stay by the door. If anyone comes, I'll hear it first. Her breathing slowed, finally easing into sleep. As the cabin dimmed, Elias leaned back against the wooden wall. He felt the weight of responsibility settling in, heavier than he expected. He had rescued people before in passing, but they never stayed. Now he had someone wounded, alone, and dependent on his choices. It stirred a mix of worry and determination inside him. Worry that the gang might still be out there, and determination that she wouldn't fall back into their hands. He looked at her one more time before closing his eyes. She was safe. He had done the right thing. Tomorrow would bring questions: where she came from, who she had lost, what she wanted to do next. But tonight, all he needed to do was keep the fire burning and make sure no danger crossed that door. And he intended to do exactly that. Morning light crept through the narrow gaps in the shutter, casting thin stripes across the cabin floor. Elias opened his eyes the moment the room brightened, still sitting where he had rested against the wall. His back hurt from sleeping half upright, but he didn't move for a while. He listened first, something he always did. The wind outside was calm, no approaching horses, no breaking branches. The world was quiet. Ayoka slept soundly, which eased one of the concerns Elias had carried through the night. Her breathing was steady, and some of the tension had drained from her face. Seeing her sleep safely under his roof felt like confirmation that bringing her here had been the right decision. When he finally stood, he moved carefully so the creaking boards wouldn't startle her. He added wood to the stove and stepped outside to check the ground around the cabin. He wasn't looking for trouble, only for reassurance that trouble hadn't found them. There were his own tracks from last night and the familiar marks of the animals near the corral. Nothing else. No stray boot prints, no drag brush, no signs the gang had returned. The quiet was real, but he also knew Ayoka would need to hear that from him directly. People recovering from danger didn't trust silence easily. Inside, she had woken and was sitting upright, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She watched him enter, but didn't appear frightened. Instead, her eyes followed him with careful curiosity, measuring his movements, trying to understand the kind of man she was staying with. You slept well, he said softly. That's good. She touched the bruise near her jaw lightly. The pain made her wince, but she didn't complain. He poured warm water from the kettle into a bowl and placed it beside her with a folded cloth. For your face and arms, he said. She dipped the cloth into the water slowly, grateful but cautious, as if expecting him to hover or interfere. He didn't. He stepped back to give her privacy, knowing she needed control after losing so much of it yesterday. As she cleaned the dirt and dried blood from her skin, he spoke in a calm, practical tone, addressing another question she might still have. No one came during the night. I checked the ground outside. No tracks except mine. Her shoulders eased a little. She needed facts, not reassurance. He gave her both. After she finished, he handed her a bowl of warm food. She ate quietly, more comfortably than the night before. She watched Elias as she ate, not with fear now, but with a kind of focused study. She was trying to piece him together, a man who lived alone, who had helped her without asking for anything. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. Why did you ride there? Last night. Elias didn't expect the question so soon, but he answered honestly. I'd been in the settlement. Was heading home. I wasn't looking for trouble. He paused, knowing she might think he saved her out of obligation or curiosity. I stopped because someone needed help. That's all. She held his gaze for a long moment, deciding whether she believed that. She nodded slowly. It made sense. A man who didn't ask for her story wasn't looking to gain anything from her, to give her something in return. And because listeners would naturally wonder, Ayoka offered a small piece of her own past, the part that explained why she had been alone. My family scattered. After the raid, Elias didn't interrupt. She wasn't telling the whole story yet, but he didn't need the rest today. What she shared was enough for now. She continued after a pause. I was looking for survivors. I did not find any. He understood the weight behind those words. Not finding someone was sometimes worse than losing them outright. It left questions that never settled. Elias decided to keep her busy with something practical, something grounding. You can sit outside if you want. Sun's warm today. Might help. He waited to see if she felt safe enough to step out of the cabin. She hesitated only a second before standing. Her legs trembled, but she didn't ask for help. She followed him outside, leaning lightly on the doorframe as she adjusted to the brightness. The cabin sat near a line of tall cottonwoods. The breeze pushed their leaves gently, and the sun warmed the dirt under her feet. Her eyes scanned the open field, the distant hills, the corral, checking for danger. She found none. Elias watched her, letting her look as long as she needed. He understood the habit. He had done the same thing countless times after waking from rough nights in unfamiliar places. Ayoka's attention then shifted to his horse grazing nearby. She approached it with slow, steady steps. Elias followed but stayed a few feet behind, ready to step in only if she stumbled. She didn't. She placed her hand gently on the horse's neck, whispering something in her language. The animal calmed instantly. Elias raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You handle horses well," he said. She nodded once. "My father taught me." Her voice softened on the last word, revealing a crack in the shield she kept around her emotions. Elias didn't push. He only said, "He taught you right," and left it there. Back inside, the morning settled into a quiet routine. Elias repaired a loose plank near the stove. Ayoka sat near the window, watching him work, occasionally studying the stitches in her torn sleeve. She finally spoke again, addressing another unspoken question. "I will not stay long. I do not want trouble to follow me here." He put down the hammer, looked at her plainly, and answered with the directness she deserved. "You stay until you're strong enough to decide where you want to go. Trouble finds all of us sooner or later. I'm not letting you walk out weak." She didn't argue. His tone wasn't controlling. It was grounded, practical, and honest. It told her he wasn't keeping her for reasons she should fear. She considered him for a long moment before nodding again. A silent agreement passed between them. Temporary or not, they would share this space, and he would carry the weight of keeping her safe for now. As midday approached, Ayoka did something small but significant. She took his torn shirt from last night and began repairing it with careful, steady hands. She didn't say why she was doing it. She simply worked, sitting near the window where the light was best. Elias noticed, but he didn't point it out. He kept hammering the plank, acting as if the gesture didn't affect him. But it did. It wasn't just mending a shirt. It was the first sign she wasn't only surviving. She was participating in the life of the cabin. A tiny shift, almost unnoticed but important. And for Elias, it marked the moment he realized the cabin felt different now. Not crowded, not burdened, just different. Warmer, more alive. The day continued quietly, but beneath that quiet, something had begun to change between them. They weren't strangers anymore. They weren't fully safe yet, but they were no longer alone. The next morning, the sun rose clear and bright, warming the front of the cabin. Elias stepped outside with a bucket in one hand, ready to haul water from the creek, when he noticed Ayoka, already awake, sitting on the porch with her repaired sleeve neatly tied in place. Her bruises had darkened, but her posture was straighter. She looked stronger than the day before, though still cautious, still alert to every sound in the distance. Elias lifted a hand in greeting. "Morning." Ayoka nodded once. She wasn't fully comfortable speaking much yet, but he didn't push conversation. He let her set the pace. He walked toward the creek, and after a moment, she rose and followed him, keeping a few steps behind. She didn't ask if she could come, but the fact she chose to follow him outside marked another small shift, another sign she trusted him more today than she did yesterday. The creek was little more than a narrow stream, but the water ran clear, cold from the mountains. Ayoka watched him fill the bucket, then knelt to wash her hands, testing her strength. The cold water made her hiss quietly, pain flickering across her face from her bruises. Elias considered offering help but held back. She was doing this because she wanted to prove to him and to herself that she could still function, still make her own choices. After a few moments, she asked a question that filled a gap the listeners would naturally wonder about. How long have you lived here? 2 years, he answered. Came after working different ranches needed quiet. He straightened up, adjusting the bucket. Figured this place was far enough from trouble. Ayoka looked toward the open land, scanning it with a faint sense of understanding. Quiet is good, she said. Her voice was soft but certain. They walked back to the cabin together. Elias noticed how she held her injured side, trying not to show discomfort. Inside, he set the water down and began preparing a simple breakfast. Ayoka watched the food, then glanced at him with the cautiousness of someone wondering if they were still a guest or becoming part of the daily rhythm. He confirmed it for her before she had to ask. You can eat as much as you need. I've got enough stored. Her eyes softened. That was another worry eased. Later that morning, Elias needed to check on the small corral behind the cabin. 2 of his horses had rubbed against the fence overnight, knocking one rail loose. When he stepped outside to fix it, Ayoka followed him again without being asked. Her steps were careful, but she moved with purpose. Let me help, she said. Elias raised an eyebrow, surprised she wanted to work in her condition. You should rest. She shook her head firmly. Rest later. He handed her a light task, holding the new rail steady while he hammered the nails in. She held the wood with both hands, jaw clenched slightly from the effort. Elias worked quickly, so she didn't strain too long. You're stubborn, he said under his breath, though not unkindly. She heard it. I don't want to sit and do nothing, she replied. My people work together. Healing is also work. This answered another unspoken question, how she saw herself in this place. She didn't want to feel like a burden or a wounded stranger waiting to be sent away. She wanted to contribute, even in small ways. Elias respected that more than he expected. By midday, the corral was fixed, and Ayoka's strength seemed steadier. Elias decided it was time to address something he knew she was wondering about: the nearest settlement, the people who lived there, and whether it was dangerous for her. Sometimes I ride into town for supplies, he said as they returned to the cabin. It's a small place, mostly ranch families and traders. Folks mind their own business, but they stare at strangers. Ayoka listened closely, weighing the information. Is it safe for me there? Elias thought carefully before answering. Safe enough if you stay close to me. Some people judge what they don't understand, but no one wants to fight. Her eyes tightened slightly, not out of fear, but out of awareness. I can handle staring, she said, but I don't want trouble for you. You won't bring trouble, Elias replied. Trouble comes on its own legs, not from people trying to live quietly. It was the closest he had come to saying she belonged here, even temporarily. Later, as afternoon settled over the land, Ayoka took Elias's shirt, the one she had repaired the day before, and inspected the stitches again, making sure they were tight. This time, she handed it to him without looking away. Better now, she said. Elias took it, feeling an unexpected warmth as he ran his fingers over the precise stitching. Thank you, he said simply. It wasn't just a repaired shirt. It was the first genuine exchange between them, something she gave because she wanted to, not because she owed him. As the sun dipped lower, Elias decided to show her something else listeners might wonder about: how he prepared the cabin for danger. He explained the lock he had built for the door, the reinforced window shutter, the hidden path behind the cottonwoods leading to the creek. Ayoka listened closely, studying each detail. He wasn't showing off. He was showing her she wasn't trapped. She had exits. She had choices. You think they will come back, she said. I think men like them don't give up easy, Elias admitted. But I'll be ready. Ayoka's eyes held his for a long moment. She saw the seriousness in him, the kind of steady confidence that came from surviving things he didn't speak about. You saved me once, she said quietly. I will not let harm come to this place either. The statement wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was a quiet promise, offered with the same strength she had used to stand up the night before. Evening settled in. They sat outside the cabin for the first time together, sharing the silence like people who didn't need to fill it. The land stretched wide around them, the sky turning red along the horizon. They weren't a pair yet, not fully, but they weren't two strangers forced together by danger anymore. Something had begun to root between them. Something steady, something honest. Their worlds were different, but here, side by side, they were learning how to walk in the same one. The following days passed with a quiet rhythm that settled naturally between Elias and Ayoka. Neither of them planned it, and neither spoke about it directly, but the routine formed all the same. Elias tended the animals every morning. Ayoka swept the porch, organized the supplies she could reach without pain, and kept the cabin neat. Sometimes she sat outside stitching leather or mending torn cloth. Sometimes she helped Elias hold tools or carry small bundles of wood. She moved with purpose now, no longer drifting from task to task with the stiffness of someone afraid they didn't belong. The bruises on her face darkened, then slowly faded. The tension in her shoulders softened. She still listened to every sound in the distance, still checked the window before sleeping, but the frantic edge in her eyes was gone. She was present, awake, surviving. Elias noticed all these changes, though he pretended he didn't stare when she walked by the window or stood quietly near the corral. He wasn't used to sharing his space with anyone, and the adjustment unsettled him more than he expected. But he didn't hide it out of discomfort, just caution. He didn't want to make her feel watched or judged. She had lived through enough of that. One morning, Ayoka joined him as he prepared to ride into the settlement for more supplies. She stepped beside the horse, touching its neck gently, and asked with calm certainty, "Can I come?" Her question filled one of the unspoken gaps listeners might have, whether she felt safe enough to face the outside world again. Elias studied her expression, checking for fear or hesitation. He found none, only resolve. "It'll be crowded," he warned. "People will stare." "I know," she said. "I didn't want to hide." Her answer was firm, not prideful, but grounded in determination. She had run enough. She wasn't running today. Elias nodded, saddled the horse, and helped her mount. She held the saddle steady with her uninjured arm, breathing through a moment of discomfort, but refusing to complain. They rode side by side toward the settlement, the land stretching open around them. As they approached town, Ayoka's shoulders tightened, but she stayed straight in the saddle. The settlement wasn't hostile, but it also wasn't used to seeing an Apache woman ride in beside a solitary cowboy. Several people stopped what they were doing. Some stared without hiding it. A few whispered. Elias walked close to her, not shielding her, but making it clear she wasn't alone. Inside the trading post, the stares softened. The owner, Mr. Halpern, nodded in greeting. "Morning, Ward. Who's your companion?" Elias answered in the calm, direct tone that left no room for gossip. "A friend staying on my land until she gets her strength back." Halpern nodded again, accepting the explanation without question. Ayoka examined the shelves quietly, looking at canned food, fabric rolls, and tools. She didn't touch anything at first, not wanting to seem unwelcome. Elias noticed the hesitation. "Take what you need," he said quietly. "If you need clothes or bandages or anything else, pick it." She looked at him with a quiet, grateful certainty, one that said she understood what it meant for him to offer her these choices in a town where strangers were scrutinized. They rode home with 2 small sacks of supplies tied behind the saddle. Ayoka held one hand on the backstrap, her posture balanced and confident. Elias watched her from the corner of his eye. She had changed more in these few days than he thought possible. Strength returned not only to her body, but to her expression, her movements, her decisions. Back at the cabin, they unloaded the supplies together. Ayoka organized the food without needing direction. Elias stored the tools. When everything was put away, an unusual quiet settled between them. Not tense, but heavy, as if something unspoken hung in the room. Ayoka stood near the table, her hands loosely clasped. Elias felt her watching him with an intensity he hadn't sensed before. He waited, giving her time to speak first. Finally, she stepped toward him, slow but certain. "My people choose in times of loss," she said. When the old life is broken, when there is no one left, a woman chooses a man she trusts. To survive, to continue. Elias froze. He had no idea where this was going, but he knew the weight behind her words. She stood close enough that he could see every fading bruise, every line of exhaustion that hadn't fully left her face. But her voice was steady. I choose you. Elias inhaled sharply and shook his head once instinctively. Ayoka, I'm not. He struggled to find the right words. You've been hurt. You're alone. You need somewhere safe. That doesn't mean you should tie yourself to someone like me. She didn't step back. I am not choosing because I am weak. I am choosing because you kept me alive. Because you did not touch me without asking. Because you speak carefully. Because you stay. Her eyes held a seriousness he couldn't dismiss. Elias felt something pull tight in his chest. Fear, responsibility, and a quiet, unexpected warmth blending together. You deserve a village, a community, he said. A future bigger than this place. This place is enough, she answered. You are enough. Her words landed with a force he wasn't prepared for. He had spent years believing he wasn't good enough for anyone. Too quiet, too broken, too haunted by the things he never told anyone. Hearing her speak with conviction shook him in a way nothing else had. A long silence stretched between them. Elias searched her expression for confusion, desperation, anything to suggest she wasn't thinking clearly. He found nothing except calm determination. She wasn't asking for pity or protection. She was making a decision according to her traditions, an act built on trust, not desperation. He lowered his eyes, steadying himself. If you're sure, then I won't walk away from it. Ayoka nodded once, firm, resolute. The decision hung in the air, simple but monumental. They weren't strangers with a temporary arrangement anymore. They weren't two lives intersecting by accident. They were choosing together, quietly, without ceremony, without dramatic words. Just the truth, spoken plainly between two people who had lost too much and found something worth holding on to. Night settled around the cabin as if marking the beginning of a new reality, one neither of them had expected, but both had accepted. The night after Ayoka chose, Elias passed in a silence that was steady rather than uncomfortable. They didn't speak much after her declaration. There was no ceremony, no sudden shift in behavior, no dramatic confession. Instead, they each carried the weight of what had been said in their own quiet way. Elias kept the fire burning, checking the doors and windows one extra time before resting. Ayoka lay under the blanket with her hands clasped over her chest, awake longer than usual, aware that the life ahead of her had changed direction. Morning brought a stillness that felt new, calmer, yet heavier. When Elias stepped out his bedroll, he found Ayoka already awake, brushing out her long hair using a small wooden comb she must have kept hidden in her belongings. She didn't look nervous or hesitant. She looked settled, as if she already accepted the decision she had made. Elias cleared his throat softly. You sleep all right? She nodded. Yes. Her voice had changed, not in tone, but in confidence. The uncertainty that had wrapped itself around her earlier in the week had loosened. Elias prepared breakfast while she gathered the bowls and utensils without being asked. It wasn't a chore division they planned. It simply happened, like an instinct shared between two people used to working in silence. Ayoka moved slowly at times, her injuries still healing, but she didn't show the same fragility as before. After they ate, she helped him clean the dishes, rinsing them at the basin he kept by the window. Elias watched her for a moment, not out of admiration or suspicion, but out of recognition. She wasn't a guest anymore. She was part of the cabin now, part of the routine, part of whatever future they were building. But he also knew listeners would wonder, what happens now? What do their new roles look like? What about consent, personal space boundaries? How does Elias handle this sudden shift without overstepping? So he addressed it directly, in the same straightforward way he handled everything. Ayoka, he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. Your choice last night, it matters. But I want something clear between us. She looked up, waiting. You're not bound to anything you're not ready for. We take this at your pace. We share the roof, The work, the decisions, but nothing more unless you speak it first. Ayoka studied him with the same calm she always carried when evaluating his words. "You respect me," she said, a quiet statement rather than a compliment. "I try to," Elias answered honestly. "It's important you feel safe here. Not just protected, safe." She nodded once. "Then we understand each other." With that, the matter settled. The day unfolded with the natural rhythm of two people adjusting to life together. Elias worked on repairing the tool shed behind the cabin, checking the hinges and reinforcing the door. He instinctively expected Ayoka to stay inside and rest, but she stepped outside after a few minutes, leaning against the porch post. "I can help," she said. "You sure?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "This isn't light work." "I am not weak," she replied plainly. She was right. She wasn't. She carried wood planks with steady hands and passed him nails when he needed them. When her arm trembled from lifting more than she should, Elias didn't call out or tell her to stop. He simply took the heavier tasks without making a point of it, letting her keep her pride intact. Later, while Elias hammered a new board into the shed frame, Ayoka stood watching him, her expression thoughtful. It took her a while before she spoke again. "My people," she began, choosing her words carefully, "they believe a bond is built by working together, by seeing how someone thinks, how they move, what their hands know." Elias looked at her, understanding the meaning behind the words. What they were doing now, fixing the shed, tending to the animals, sharing tasks, wasn't just work. It was the foundation of the life she chose. "Does this tell you anything?" he asked with a faint edge of curiosity. Ayoka's eyes softened. "It tells me you do not pretend. You do what needs to be done." He took that in quietly and returned to the hammering. The compliment wasn't emotional or poetic, but it struck him deeper than flattery ever had. Around midday, Ayoka took 2 pelts from the corner chest and began stretching them in the sun to dry. Elias noticed the precision in how she arranged them, her practiced hands revealing skills he hadn't seen yet. She worked with the focus of someone who had been taught these tasks from childhood. "You know tanning?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply. "My mother taught me. My sister too." There was a brief pause. She didn't talk much about her family, but today, something in her voice suggested she was finally able to speak of them without the sharp pain it once brought. Elias didn't press for more. He knew she'd tell him when she was ready. Later in the afternoon, she prepared a small portion of herbs to boil for her bruises. When Elias approached, she handed him a cup without hesitation. "It helps with swelling," she said. "Drink also. Good for the body after work." He accepted it without argument, surprised by the taste, bitter but oddly soothing. It was the first time she had given him something of her own tradition, something from her world. He took it seriously. As the day stretched into evening, Elias checked the horses one last time while Ayoka sat by the porch, watching the sky shift colors. When he returned, she spoke without looking at him. "I will stay," she said, confirming what both had already understood. "This place, I can breathe here." Elias stood beside her, hands at his sides, unsure what to say. He wasn't a man of many words, and even fewer when it came to emotions. But she didn't need a speech. She just needed truth. "You're welcome here," he said quietly, "for as long as you choose." Ayoka nodded. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was a simple acknowledgement, one that carried more weight than any vow could. As night settled over the land, they ate dinner in silence, not strained, but familiar. The cabin felt different now, steadier, lived in by 2 instead of 1. The warmth from the stove spread evenly through the room, and for the first time since their first meeting, neither of them checked the door or listened for distant riders before resting. They slept knowing they had chosen each other, not out of desperation, not out of fear, but because the life forming between them was real. And tomorrow, they would live it fully side by side. For several days, life at the cabin settled into a steady rhythm. Elias and Ayoka worked side by side, beginning to understand each other in small, practical ways, how the other moved, how they handled tension when they needed silence. The early awkwardness faded, replaced with a quiet familiarity. Neither spoke much of the future, but the way they shared each day made it clear they were building one whether they admitted it or not. But both of them knew danger rarely stayed gone forever. Survival wasn't just about healing, it was about staying alert. Elias had been checking the land around the cabin more often. He didn't tell Ayoka at first, not wanting to stir fear without proof, but he noticed little things. A branch snapped in a way the wind wouldn't do. Hoof tracks half erased by dust, the faint smell of smoke drifting from a place where no fire should be. Nothing certain, nothing he could point to and name as a threat. But the land had changed the way it sounded. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, Elias stepped outside with a cup of coffee and froze. Near the far end of the field, a fresh set of hoof prints cut across the soil. New, sharp, and heading in a direction no rancher had reason to travel. He knelt, studying them with a grim expression. 3 horses, maybe 4. Ayoka stepped onto the porch behind him, wrapped in her shawl. She followed his gaze and immediately understood what he was looking at. Her breath caught slightly. She didn't panic, but her posture stiffened the way it had the night he found her. "They are coming?" she asked. "Could be scouts," Elias answered calmly. "Could be nothing, but we have to assume they're looking." He didn't want to frighten her, but he refused to lie. Honesty had become their unspoken rule. Ayoka took a slow breath, steadying herself. The uncertainty was familiar to her, but this time she was not alone on open ground. There were walls around her. A man who cared whether she lived or died. A place worth defending. "What do we do?" she asked. "We prepare," Elias said simply. Inside, he laid out the supplies. Ammunition, the spare rifle, a knife, matches, rope, a water skin, and a small pouch of supplies Ayoka had prepared earlier without telling him. She had been ready for this possibility. As they worked, Ayoka addressed a question listeners would surely wonder about: why the gang would still be after her. "Those men, they were not just thieves," she said quietly. "They hunted my people's camps. They wanted control. They do not forget when someone escapes." Elias absorbed her words with a tightening jaw. "Then they'll come looking for what they lost. But we are not what they think," she added firmly. "I am not running, and you are not alone." Elias paused, taking in the certainty in her voice. She wasn't the terrified woman he carried from the creek. She was stronger, bolder, and fully aware of the danger she was choosing to face with him. They spent the morning reinforcing the cabin, Elias checking the shutters, Ayoka preparing a bucket of water to keep by the door, clearing the interior so they had open sight lines. He explained how he planned to counter an attack and where she should stand if things turn violent. "You will not stand in front of me," Elias insisted, expecting resistance. But surprisingly, she didn't argue. She just stepped closer, placed her hand lightly on his forearm, and said, "I will stand where I am needed." It wasn't disobedience. It was partnership. That afternoon, tensions rose again when Elias spotted a rider on the far ridge. Too far to identify, but close enough to send a clear message. Someone was watching the cabin. Elias and Ayoka both stepped inside without speaking, closing the door quietly. Elias kept the rifle near the window. Ayoka watched the ridge through a narrow gap in the shutter, face expressionless and calm. "They are testing the land," she said. "Yes," Elias replied. "Seeing if we're alone. Seeing how strong we are." Silence filled the cabin for a long moment. Then Ayoka spoke something he wasn't expecting. "When the time comes, I will stand with you. I gave my word." Elias turned to her, meeting her eyes. "And I gave mine when I brought you here. You're not facing them alone again." Their exchange promise settled heavy in the room, but not with fear, with resolve. Later that evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, they ate a quiet meal. Elias barely touched his plate, his mind busy with calculations. How many men might come, how they'd approach, how long they could hold the cabin if needed. Ayoka noticed his tension and set her hand on the table near his. She didn't touch him directly, but the gesture steadied him anyway. "We have faced worse," she said softly. Elias shook his head faintly. "You have. I've seen things, but not like what you've survived." Ayoka considered him carefully. "You think you're not strong?" "I think," he began, struggling to put it into words, "I've spent so long trying to avoid trouble that I forgot what it feels like to fight for something that matters." Ayoka absorbed that quietly. Then now you remember. Her words were simple, but they cut through the weight he carried. Night fell slowly. They did not sleep right away. Elias sat by the window with the rifle across his lap. Ayoka sat beside the stove, sharpening a small bone-handled knife with steady strokes. The cabin felt smaller, more focused, every object placed with purpose. Outside, the land held its breath. Before they finally lay down to rest, Ayoka spoke one more time, addressing a silent question the listeners might still carry. Did she regret choosing him? Her voice was calm, low, certain. I chose this life with clear mind, she said. Whatever comes, I do not step back. Elias met her eyes in the dim firelight. Neither do I. They rested beside each other's presence, not touching, not close, but aware. Aware of the danger, aware of their bond, aware that tomorrow the gang might return for vengeance. But they weren't the same people as before. They were no longer two lives fleeing their pasts. They were one stand, one choice, one family forming through survival and quiet loyalty. And when the threat finally came, they would face it together. The morning came with a stillness that felt unnatural. Even the birds kept quiet, as if the land sensed what was approaching. Elias stepped outside before sunrise, scanning the hills with slow, deliberate movements. The hoofprints he had seen the day before were sharper now, more numerous. Someone had ridden close during the night, but stayed just out of view. Ayoka joined him on the porch, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She stood close, not out of fear, but readiness. Her silence this morning wasn't uncertainty. It was preparation. She knew, as he did, that this day would decide everything. They are near, she said. Yeah, Elias answered. It's time. They returned inside and closed the door. Elias secured the heavy beam across it, double-checked the shutters, and placed ammunition within arm's reach. Ayoka moved with practiced efficiency, setting the water bucket near the stove, laying out the small knife, and preparing a second rifle by the window. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't overwhelmed. She had faced danger her entire life. This time, she faced it with someone beside her. Will they bring many? She asked. Enough to think they can finish what they started, Elias replied, loading his rifle. But not so many they think they need a full attack. They don't know what's waiting inside. Ayoka nodded. She understood the strategy immediately. These men believed she was defenseless. They believed Elias was a loner who stumbled into their business. They didn't expect to prepare defense. They didn't expect unity. A question listeners might wonder. Were they scared? Ayoka answered it in her own quiet way. I'm not afraid of them, she said. Only of losing what I have found here. Elias paused, his hand tightening around the rifle. You won't lose it. Not if I can help it. Outside, the first distant hoofbeats broke the morning silence. Slow at first, then multiplied. 4, maybe 5 riders approaching from the ridge. Elias and Ayoka exchanged a look, the kind that carried more trust than words. It begins, she said. Elias positioned himself at the front window, the rifle barrel just below the sill. Ayoka moved to the side window, facing the corral. From there, she could cover the flank, keeping watch over the blind spot behind the cabin. The riders came into view, 5 men, the same kind who had attacked her camp, rough-looking, confident, moving with the arrogance of men who believed the land belonged to them. They rode in a wide circle, studying the cabin. They're testing, Elias murmured. Ayoka tracked their positions, her face steady. They expect me alone, she said. They do not know your ways. Good, Elias replied. Let's surprise them. The men dismounted behind a cluster of brush, thinking the cabin couldn't see them. Elias raised a rifle, exhaled slowly, and fired. One man dropped instantly, collapsing behind his horse. The others jumped into a panic, shouting orders and scattering to cover. They know now, Ayoka said sharply. Then let them come. Gunfire erupted. Bullets struck the cabin walls, sending splinters flying. Elias stayed behind the reinforced shutter, firing only when he saw a clear target. Ayoka moved with remarkable calm, her aim steady, her breath controlled. She fired 3 shots, each one precise, each one forcing the attackers deeper behind cover. Elias glanced at her once, surprised but not shocked. She had told him she could fight. Now he understood how deeply survival was ingrained in her. "They're moving left," she called out. "I see them." 2 men attempted to rush the side of the cabin. Elias repositioned to the corner window, took aim, and fired. One dropped. The other stumbled, injured, crawling toward a fallen log. Ayoka didn't hesitate. She fired and ended it cleanly. Silence fell for a moment. The cabin creaked under the weight of tension, but no footsteps approached. Elias listened carefully, waiting for the next move. "They will not stop," Ayoka said quietly. "Not until they are gone." Elias nodded. "Then we finish it." The last man, a larger, meaner-looking rider, broke from cover and ran toward the cabin with a pistol in each hand. He shouted something neither of them could understand, enraged and reckless. Elias moved to fire, but the angle was wrong. Ayoka reacted first. She pushed open the side shutter by 2 inches, took a calm breath, and shot him before he reached the door. He fell forward, sliding in the dirt, one hand twitching before going still. The land went quiet again. Elias lowered his rifle slowly and approached the window, scanning for any remaining threats. None appeared. The attackers were down, scattered across the field like broken shadows. "It's over," he said softly. Ayoka stepped away from the window, her shoulders rising and falling with deep breaths. The calm she held through the fight now released into a quiet, steady relief. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was simply alive and aware that this time she had fought with someone who refused to leave her behind. Elias placed the rifle on the table and looked at her, not as the wounded woman he saved, not as the stranger he sheltered, but as the partner who just stood with him against death. "You kept us alive," he said. "We kept each other alive," she replied. Her words were simple, but the truth behind them hit him harder than the gunfire. They stepped outside together, walking among the fallen attackers. Elias checked each one briefly, confirming the fight was finished. Ayoka stood beside him, her expression solemn, not triumphant. These men had once destroyed her world. Today, she closed that chapter herself. "No more running," she said softly. "No," Elias agreed. "No more." The cabin stood strong behind them, smoke drifting gently from the chimney, the land stretching open and peaceful in the morning light. For the first time since she came here, Ayoka felt completely safe, not because the danger was gone, but because she had faced it with someone she trusted fully. They walked back into the cabin without fear, without hesitation, and without the weight of uncertainty that once chased them. Now they had a life to build, and nothing stood in their way. The sun had risen higher by the time Elias and Ayoka finished clearing the field. The bodies were moved far enough away to keep scavengers from lingering near the cabin, and the disturbed earth where the riders fell had begun to settle under the morning wind. Neither of them said much during the work. There were no words needed. The danger that had chased Ayoka across the territory, across weeks of fear, grief, and exhaustion, was finally gone. When they walked back to the cabin, the air felt different. Not lighter, not cheerful, just steady, grounded, safe in a way it hadn't been before. Ayoka paused at the porch, placing her hand on the railing Elias had repaired earlier in the week. Her thumb brushed over the smooth wood. It was a small moment, but Elias noticed the quiet meaning behind it. She was touching her home, truly touching it, as if confirming it was real. Inside, Elias set his rifle against the wall. Ayoka put the knife she had used back in its proper place. These were small actions, but they marked the end of something heavy. The weapons could rest now. So could they. A practical question had lingered throughout the story. What becomes of Ayoka's place in the world now? What future does she choose? Does she still search for her scattered family? Can the two of them build a life without fear of interruption? Ayoka addressed it naturally as they sat at the table, drinking water and catching their breath. "I want to stay here," she said. "Not because I must, but because I choose to. This place, it feels like the beginning." Elias watched her closely. She spoke without hesitation, her voice steady. The wariness she once carried had faded. She wasn't clinging out of survival anymore. She was deciding with a clear mind. There might still be people out there you're hoping to find, Elias said carefully. If you ever want to search. I know, she interrupted gently, but I'm not alone anymore. If there are survivors among my people, they will find their own path. I have found mine. Her words settled into Elias with a quiet finality. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He had lived most of his life convincing himself he wasn't someone others would stay with. Hearing her say she wanted to remain here with him, was something he had never imagined. He cleared his throat. Then you stay as long as this place feels right to you. A faint smile touched her lips. It feels right now. They spent the rest of the day tending to the land in a way that felt almost ceremonial. Elias repaired the part of the fence damaged during the attack. Ayoka washed the last of their supplies, refilled the water barrels, and sorted their herbs and tools. Every task they completed together felt like laying another stone in the foundation of a life they had chosen. Later, Elias took lumber from the shed and began marking the ground next to the cabin. Ayoka approached, curious. What are you building? A room, Elias said plainly. Figure we could use the space. If we're going to live here long term, we shouldn't be stepping over each other inside. Ayoka knelt beside the marked line, touching the dirt. A room for both of us. For both of us, Elias confirmed. For whatever comes next. She breathed in slowly, as if letting the idea settle into her bones. This is good, she said, building something together. As Elias worked, Ayoka didn't just watch. She carried small pieces of lumber, held the measuring rope, and handed him tools when he needed them. She took pride in every board placed, in every nail hammered. Her participation wasn't symbolic. It was a real contribution to their shared home. As the sun lowered, they sat on the porch for the first quiet moment of the day. The land stretched out before them, untouched by danger now, the cottonwoods swaying softly. Ayoka's hair moved in the breeze, and Elias leaned back slightly, letting the tension finally leave his body. A question that might still linger for listeners. Were they truly together now? Was their bond mutual, steady, and real? Found its answer in the simplicity of this shared moment. Ayoka rested her hand on the porch railing, just close enough that Elias could sense its warmth. She didn't take his hand, and he didn't take hers. They didn't need to. Their closeness was already understood. You gave me a place to stand, she said softly. You gave me a reason to stop drifting, Elias replied. The honesty of that statement surprised even him. Ayoka's expression softened in a way he hadn't seen before. Not relief, not gratitude, but something deeper. Acceptance, a sense of belonging. The sky turned orange as the sun dipped behind the hills. Elias glanced at her. Are you all right? She looked out over the open land, her voice calm and certain. I'm home. Elias felt something settle in his chest, something steady, something right. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overwhelming. It was simply the truth. They watched the sunset together, sitting close enough for warmth, silent in the way people are when they no longer feel the need to guard themselves. Inside the cabin, the fire warmed the room. Outside, the wind carried no warnings. The threat was gone, the past had been faced, and the future no longer felt uncertain. When they finally rose to go inside, Ayoka paused at the doorway and looked back at the land once more, not with fear, but with peace. This cabin, this man, this quiet stretch of the Arizona territory, this was her life now. A life she chose freely. A life she was ready to build with her own hands. And for the first time in years, Elias Ward stepped into his home knowing he wasn't walking into an empty room. He was walking into a shared life. A new beginning. A full ending. A future without unanswered questions. They closed the door behind them, together,